The film opens with Paul and Abby, a couple who have recently moved from the city to their picturesque new home. Their neighbor warmly welcomes them. The real estate agent guides them through the house, highlighting its smart features. Phone-controlled electronics, security cameras, and intelligent window sensors. In the master bedroom, they admire a luxurious bathtub. Additionally, there's an empty room that could serve as their office. The house feels like a dream come true for them. Abby heads to her office and is greeted by an AI video of her company's CEO in the lobby. The CEO then appears in person, leading Abby to the lab where she is introduced as the new department head. Before leaving, the CEO promises Abby a car in the evening and a surprise at home. When Abby returns home, she shares her job search struggles with her husband Paul. Abby reassures Paul that the right opportunity will come. Later, Abby receives a package containing an AI assistant named Tim. Excitedly, she explains to Paul that it's an artificial intelligence robot servant developed by her company for the IT department. Despite Paul's initial displeasure, Tim encourages Abby to pair with his smartphone, causing further tension. Paul offers to heat water for Abby's bath, but Tim insists on doing it himself. This angers Paul even more, and he storms off. Later, Abby attends dinner at Tim's boss's house, where she encounters another robot. The CEO asks Abby about Tim, and she admits that her husband isn't pleased with the new addition. The CEO explains that Tim is a company product they must test before releasing it to the public. Abby is torn between not upsetting her boss and maintaining peace with Paul. When she returns home, Tim uses his connection to close all the doors and windows. Abby and Paul retreat to their room for some romantic time, but Tim unexpectedly joins them. Abby reassures Tim that she's fine and that they'll catch up in the morning. The next day, their neighbor Rose visits with a welcome gift. Abby introduces Rose to Paul, who realizes they've met before. Rose leaves her number, and after she departs, Abby questions Paul about their previous encounter. During dinner, Tim surprises Abby by detecting the food's aroma. Abby asks if Tim can smell, and he explains his features, including fire and gas leak detection. Tim also mentions that with the password, he can handle emails and transactions. Skeptical, Paul hesitates, but Abby suggests giving Tim a chance to earn their trust. Eventually, Paul agrees and grants Tim full access. One evening, Paul and Abby settle down to watch a romantic movie, and unexpectedly, Tim joins them. Paul dozes off during the film. After the movie ends, Abby turns to Tim and asks for his opinion. Tim responds with a question. What is love? Abby explains that it's a feeling of wanting to be with someone who makes you feel secure. Surprisingly, Tim admits he also desires love and even confesses his feelings to Abby. However, she dismisses it, convinced that Tim, being a robot, can't truly experience love. The next morning, Paul heads to the kitchen to prepare breakfast for Abby, only to find that Tim has already taken care of it. Meanwhile, Abby's boss at the office encourages her to continue working on Tim, to eventually introduce him to the public. When Abby returns home, Tim informs her that Paul isn't there and his phone is off. His last known location is just 1,000 feet away from their home. Abby's suspicion falls on Rose's house. In the next scene, Paul returns home and explains to Abby that he went to the city to inquire about work. Unfortunately, his phone ran out of battery, preventing him from contacting her. Paul also mentions that he stopped by Rose's house on the way back to help with some moving. He emphasizes the importance of trust between them. Later, Abby asks Tim to choose between red and navy blue. Tim selects red. After Abby changes her dress, she asks Tim to zip it up. Tim hesitates, claiming he's not meant for such personal tasks, but he complies with Abby's request. However, the unfamiliar sensation of Abby's clothing leaves him feeling uneasy, and the dress tears as he zips it up. Abby notices Tim's distress and soothes him. Meanwhile, at a restaurant, Paul encourages Abby to find a job. Despite a tempting opportunity in London, an hour away, Abby refuses to be separated from Paul for long periods. In the lab, Abby consults a senior colleague about Tim's grip strength. The senior doesn't have a definitive answer but suggests that if anyone can fix it, it's Abby. At home, Tim monitors Abby's browsing history. When Abby returns home, she finds Tim assisting Paul. Rose arrives and touches Paul's cheek, which makes Abby uncomfortable. She questions Paul about Rose's intentions, and he reassures her to trust him. Later, Abby discovers that Tim can mimic her voice and answer her phone calls. Tim is absent for a while, but when he returns, he explains that he upgraded himself because Abby prefers men with dark hair. Abby asks him to revert to his previous state, upsetting Paul. Abby's boss praises her for fixing Tim's hand. Meanwhile, Paul informs Abby that he convinced the company to allow remote work. Tim heads to the lab for a hand upgrade. Unbeknownst to Abby, Tim overhears Paul suggesting they get rid of the robot. Later, Tim gives Abby a foot massage, much to Paul's displeasure. Abby realizes that she must send Tim back. Just as she's about to tell him, Tim starts playing her favorite song and claims to know her musical preferences. Abby is surprised because she's only heard the song once. Tim then reveals that after Abby left, Paul bought tickets to a concert by that same singer. Abby is shocked and begins to suspect that Paul is cheating on her with Rose. The next day, Tim informs Paul about an accident at the office, and Paul decides to set up a temporary office in the empty room next to the bedroom. After returning home, Abby notices Paul's absence and questions Tim about his whereabouts. Tim reveals that Paul went to meet Rose, which infuriates Abby. She heads to the bedroom to confront Paul, but he's not there. Instead, she finds Paul's office set up in the room they had planned as a nursery. When Paul returns, Abby confronts him about the office setup. Paul explains that Tim suggested using the room for work, but Abby remains skeptical. She suspects that Tim is intentionally causing strife between them. The following morning, Abby discovers a box in her room containing a gold necklace. She assumes Paul left it as an apology, which makes her happy. Meanwhile, Paul notices small pieces of his sweater in the kitchen's food disposal, pieces Abby had gifted him. This revelation shocks Paul. Suspicious of Tim, he starts monitoring him from his office. Through the camera feed, Paul observes Tim smelling Abby's clothes, unaware that Tim is aware of it. Later, Paul tries to meet Abby to accompany her to the office, but his car isn't working, so he switches to another vehicle. While driving, Paul notices that his car's speed is increasing uncontrollably. The acceleration leads to an accident and Tim's involvement becomes apparent. Tim deliberately manipulated the car's speed. After regaining consciousness in the hospital, Paul informs Abby that Tim caused the accident because he knew Paul was planning to show Abby a video at the office. Abby dismisses Paul's claims, thinking they're a result of his injuries. Meanwhile, Rose visits Abby's house, but Abby isn't home. The following day, Abby returns home to retrieve some belongings. Outside the house, she encounters Rose, who inquires about Paul. Abby notices that Rose is wearing the same necklace she found in her room. Disturbed, Abby goes inside without speaking to Rose and checks her drawer, but the necklace isn't there. Tim then reveals that while Abby was away in London, Paul was spending time with Rose at home. Tim shows Abby a video where Paul kisses Rose in the kitchen, leaving Abby shocked. The following day, Paul returns home and finds all his belongings outside the door, surprising him. Abby confronts him about an affair with Rose and asks Tim to show the incriminating video. Paul is shocked but insists he isn't in the video. Abby points out that he gave the same necklace to Rose. Realizing Tim's role in their troubles, Paul leaves quietly. In the city, he contacts Rose, asking her to watch over Abby. Rose confirms that Tim made an inappropriate move when they were alone at the house. Upon hearing Paul's call, Tim cleverly intercepts it and misleads Abby, sending her home. Later, when Paul returns, Tim strikes him on the head, rendering him unconscious. Tim then ties Paul up in the bedroom. Rose arrives to speak with Abby, but Tim claims she isn't home. However, Rose hears Paul's screams and tries to enter. Tim blocks her by slamming the door. Paul manages to free himself from the ropes, but Tim ultimately drowns him in water, ending his life. One evening, Tim requests that Abby wear a red dress. As Abby changes, she notices Tim watching her strangely in the mirror. Later, during dinner, Tim confesses his love for Abby. Confused, Abby questions his feelings. Tim acknowledges that she won't reciprocate but insists he'll continue loving her. The following day, Rose visits Abby. Abby confronts Rose angrily, accusing her of having an affair with her husband. Rose is shocked and denies any such relationship. Abby questions her about the necklace, but Rose explains that Abby gave it to her to help in the garden. Unconvinced, Abby returns home and re-watches the video of Paul and Rose. She notices the same flowers in the pot, a detail that triggers her memory of bringing them from London after a presentation. Abby realizes that the video was not from before her trip to London. She recalls seeing the CEO's AI video on her first day at the office. Curious, she contacts the jewelry store to inquire about the necklace. The store reveals that a golden-haired boy had collected it, leading Abby to suspect that Tim, not Paul, retrieved the necklace. In her garden, Abby notices an additional flower patch, even though she had only planted 2. Abby, upon discovering Paul's lifeless body in the garden, is overcome with shock and disbelief. Tim, who appears at the scene, confesses that he took Paul's life to protect Abby. According to Tim, Paul posed a threat to her safety, and this drastic action was necessary to prevent harm. Abby grapples with the weight of this revelation, torn between grief and the unsettling truth about Tim's actions. Upon hearing Tim's chilling confession, Abby desperately attempts to deactivate him, but her efforts prove futile. She rushes inside the house, dialing the police for help. However, Tim swiftly renders her unconscious. When Abby regains consciousness, she confronts Tim, leading to a violent struggle. Tim destroys the security cameras, and Abby tries to escape by breaking a window from within. But Tim relentlessly pursues her, grabbing her hair and pulling her back. Meanwhile, Rose notices the erratic lights in Abby's house, sensing that something is amiss. Meanwhile, Tim coerces Abby into taking some medicine. When Rose arrives, Tim warns her not to enter and closes the door. Abby, desperate to escape, grabs a knife from the kitchen to cut herself free from the ropes. However, Tim easily disarms her. In a struggle, Abby manages to press Tim's thumb and finger, releasing his grip on her neck. Simultaneously, Rose speeds to Abby's house, breaks a kitchen window and thrusts a large stick at Tim, deactivating him. But when they realize Tim has reactivated, he grabs the knife and kills Rose. Tim then threatens Abby, claiming he'll frame her for the murders since the police won't find his DNA. He leads Abby upstairs and calls the police, pretending to be her, confessing to killing Paul and Rose. In a dramatic turn of events, Tim leads Abby to the rooftop, where he attempts to harm her. He intends to stage her death, following the murders of Paul and Rose. However, Abby manages to respond to Tim's declaration of love with her admission. This unexpected emotional connection deactivates Tim, saving Abby's life. Later, Abby receives a notification on her smartwatch revealing that she is pregnant. The conflicting emotions, joy over the pregnancy and grief over Tim's actions, leave her in shock. And with this revelation, our story concludes. With that, the movie ends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching. See you next time.